Welcome to the introduction video on how to use the 3D strap. In part one, I'm going to review the 3 most common ways to get into the strap and then demonstrate how that changes how resistance is applied through the body and therefore changes the focus of each exercise. The first and most common way to get into the strap is by putting one arm in, kind of like you're getting into a backpack, walking out so the strap gets tight, and then spinning in the opposite direction of the arm that you put into the strap. Now, starting in this position, I'm facing you and the cable is exiting perpendicular to where I'm facing. In this position, the strap plus the resistance is trying to do 3 things. 1, shift me towards the cable machine. 2, spin me towards the cable machine. And now 3, the more I'm facing the cable machine, the more the strap plus the resistance is trying to extend my spine. So the competing strategies or the overcoming strategies are to resist that extension in the trunk and then control and move against that shift and then control and move against that rotation. All right? So you can design exercises with those efforts in mind. Now, one more thing I can do in this setup, in this arrangement, is I can face away from the resistance and merge the strap using the strap wrap across my front of my hip. Now in this position, I have a cool way to improve the hip hinge. The strap is going to try to pull my hips back through my pelvis, and my overcoming strategy or my competing strategy is to push my hips forward right into that strap, which provides kind of like a tactile cue to get your clients using their hips and not their back. I can do this and perform this in a bilateral stance, bilateral symmetrical stance, or I can come up with single leg variations, adding some locomotion. I really like that variation. The second way to get into the strap is by putting one arm in, this time with it against the back of your shoulder, having it cross the front of your body, and then rotating toward the arm that you put into the strap. Ideally, you'll have the strap connected to the back of your pelvis or your butt. So in this position, you can feel the resistance try to pull your pelvis forward. Therefore, you push back with your pelvis, and then you kind of have to get back onto this heel a little bit more. In this setup, I have a cool way to do trunk or core facilitated lower body strength training, lunges, split squats, deceleration. And if I turn away from you, I can create an exercise to work on the lead side's action to rotational power. So if I'm in this universal swing stance, it's not specific to baseball or golf per se, just kind of universal, I can feel that I'm creating rotation by getting pressure into my lead side and pushing the pelvis back against the strap, pulling the cable back toward me, right? Pushing back with that pelvis. This becomes a lead side complement to all of our trail side extension work that we do with other exercises. The third way you're going to get into the strap is going to be used to improve pelvic awareness and control. You're going to start by raising up the resistance slightly compared to the previous 2 setups. You're going to put one leg in and slide the strap wrap up. You're going to walk out, keep the strap high around the thigh, and spin in the opposite direction of the leg that you put into the strap. You're going to keep the fabric merged against your back pocket and your side pocket. In this position, the strap is going to try to shift you towards the cable, going to try to spin you towards the cable, and in an absence of a stacked trunk or engaged core, it's also going to try to extend you. So you have to resist against that extension, you got to control and move against that lateral pull, and you got to control and move against that rotational pull. So you can design or coach exercises with those efforts and load vectors in mind. Those are the 3 ways to get into the 3D strap. In part 2, I'm going to review technique of the most foundational and popular exercises using the strap. In part 2 of this introduction, I'm going to cover the technique and coaching points of the foundational movements using the 3D strap. The place I'm going to begin with any client, regardless of ability or goal, is going to be some form of hip hinge. There will be mechanical lessons that we will learn when performing a hinge, and then subsequently our basic frontal plane work that will transfer and that we will install into the more athletic motions. So I really encourage that you follow this progression if you want clean, athletic, multi-directional movement when things get more fun. All right, I'm going to start by putting one arm in and spinning in the opposite direction. I'm going to merge that strap across the front of my hip. And for my hinges, I'm always going to use a PVC because I think it makes the exercise easier to perform but while still focusing on what we want to focus on. Makes the exercise a little bit easier to load without worrying about getting pulled back into the cable machine. It also encourages a reach forward, which can clean up the depth of the hinge. So it does a couple things. So I'll always use it. Going to merge that strap over the front of the hip. Going to start in this symmetrical bilateral stance. I'm going to let the strap win and pull my hips back. Then I'm going to stand up by pushing my hips into the strap, firing my glute. Okay? Hips back, let the strap win, form a deep crease, push your hips forward, get nice and tall, feeling like you're getting pulled through the ceiling, not backwards. A progression beyond the basic symmetrical hinge is a pivot hinge, or a hinge with a little bit of rotation. This is a good primer for medicine ball work because it encourages a good sequence from the ground up for a lot of our rotational medicine ball throws. I'm going to slightly open up my stance. I'm going to once again let that strap win, pull my hips back. Now, instead of just firing my hip forward, I'm going to think about actually pushing into the ground all the way through the toes, using the PVC for a little bit of balance. Hips back, let the body rotate a little bit, then push into the ground all the way through the toes. Butt back, okay, hips through, pushing all the way through the floor. Okay, that is a pivot hinge or a hinge with rotation. Last progression or last variation I'll demonstrate in this introduction is combining the hinge with a step up, some sort of step up, as you'll see. We're going to start by adding a little bit of a step back, okay, forming a deep crease in this hip, okay, then adding a step up to some form of box, which is going to encourage full extension, exhaustion out of this leg, hip, knee, okay, and ankle. Hopefully, you would see why we need to kind of start and install a good hinging pattern before we move to this single leg triple extension variation. The next series of exercises challenge movement and control side to side. I'm going to start by getting into the strap, in and spin. Going to end up in an athletic position. Going to bend my knees, bend my hips. Going to start with my feet pretty close together. Going to lift this lead leg, take a very controlled step or bound away from the resistance. Now going to lift this inside leg and take a very controlled step or bound back toward the resistance. Again, that is an introductory exercise to controlling the body, again, side to side, or what's called in the frontal plane. I like that exercise because you spend some time on 2 feet to get the athlete or client comfortable. You also spend some time on one leg, but you're not spending the whole time on one leg, which is why the next exercise is progression. The next exercise is going to be a step back one leg deadlift or step back one leg hinge. Now, for demonstration purposes and the angle of the camera, I'm going to turn about, 15 degrees to my right. The cable or the resistance is still exiting fairly perpendicular to the direction that I am looking. In this position, I'm going to start with my feet close together. I'm going to take a step back and actually get that foot into the ground like a kickstand. I'm going to tip over, hopefully mostly at the hips. Then I'm going to stand back up, returning to my standing position. Tip over at the hips, stand up, back to my starting position. You can progress that by taking a step back, returning into a single leg balanced position. Taking a step back, returning to that balanced position. You can add a cross kind of connection here by pressing into the thigh, step back, up, press into the thigh. If that's clean, you add a little bit of rotation on the way down. Step back, kickstand that foot into the ground, rotate the trunk, and then return to your standing cross-connect position. Step back, get that foot into the ground like a kickstand, a little bit of rotation, come up, cross connection, and you're really going to feel that in the glutes. Now, that exercise can certainly mature to an unsupported version where you are on one leg and you are performing an unsupported single leg deadlift pattern. Okay, this is going to be probably one of the last progressions that you use for this motion. And this is definitely different than using free weights like holding onto dumbbells or a barbell. Now, it's hard to say when it's appropriate to progress to rotational or transverse plane motion, but I'm confident that you should be competent with your hip hinging and demonstrate control during your frontal plane exercises before you make things too complex. As a reminder, your hip hinge teaches good trunk structure or trunk alignment during a basic dynamic motion. So can you keep these two blocks stacked over one another? The frontal plane exercises teach good side-to-side stability in the hip or in the leg. When combined, we will need for rotational type motion. So even by the time I get to something like the pivot, I'm going to start as simple as possible with an abbreviated range of motion and then make things more complex over time. My first version of the pivot is just going to be a tall pivot, especially when I'm introducing this to like a general population client who's just a golfer who might be rehabbing from an injury. I'm going to start tall. I'm going to keep the nose still. I'm going to have them let the strap win, and I'm going to ask them to return back to their starting position. And I want them to return to their starting position by feeling as though they're using their abs to get there. Okay? That's what I want to find. I want to keep the nose relatively still. I want to let the strap win and then return back to their starting position. I'm not trying to keep the hips locked up for sure. I'm not just trying to get this through the thoracic spine or spine. I'm going to let their body rotate, keep the nose quiet, and then return back to their starting position. And I am coaching from the frontal plane, again, watching that trunk structure, watching that alignment. We don't want it to break down where their spine ends up in too much extension at any point during the motion. Okay. Once the client starts to get this, right, and they're feeling it in the muscles we want them to feel it, you can begin to add a little bit of a squat. So they're going to sit and then stand as they combine the same intent of the tall pivot. Sit and stand. Again, returning to that starting position, finding their abs. Okay. Sitting into the hip, butt back, pushing through the floor, finding their abs. Now, the nose, it goes up and down, but it stays quiet side to side. Sit, get short, push, get tall. Sit, get short, push, and get tall. From there, you can stagger the stance and make this more of a single leg exercise, which will free up the motion a little bit. That's what you'll find. Nose still stays quiet. I get short, I get tall. And it's also important to recognize that it's easy to get distracted and think that this is like just a rotational propulsion type sequence. This is also, if not more important, for rotational deceleration for, again, reconditioning athletes or strengthening deceleration capacity with your athletes. Now, a hinge, a frontal plane exercise, and an introduction to pivot or turning is a great catalog to start with any client. But now I'm going to take it a step further and re-emphasize one exercise that I love, but I don't see too many trainers using it either on their own or with clients online. And maybe it's because I haven't done a good job explaining why I see the value in it, or maybe because it's just too damn hard, which I totally understand. It may be a little bit too funky to perform in a commercial gym. That is going to be a single leg squat using the strap. You are going to start by standing up on a box, and to troubleshoot this exercise, the resistance is no longer coming out from my side. If you imagine a pane of glass extending out from my side, that cable is now about 25 degrees in front of me. You can start by just performing a control-focused step down, which means that there's not going to be any motion through the trunk. All right, so you're landing that plane gently on the floor and then stepping back up. You can do the same thing, but you can add some rotation at the bottom, and then a return to the top. Some rotation at the bottom, and then a return to the top. Now I'm gonna need to have already introduced some basic pivot to understand the trunk mechanics and the hinge to understand trunk alignment to be able to do this well in a more complex pattern like this. You can make this more of a hinge and a kind of like a skater squat, and you can make this more knee dominant by reaching forward. So yes, it is difficult. Yes, it is advanced, but I value it because to me, it's complementary to the big barbell bilateral stuff. I want to build a body, an athlete that can do both, that can really lock up and move some heavy weight, and that can really unlock itself and perform this more multi-planar motion. The next few exercises probably could be considered mobility exercises because we are trying to improve movement availability, but I want you to do so in a way that is focused on awareness and control. You are not using the strap plus an external resistance to pull your body into new or unexplored ranges of motion. With that said, let's start with our pelvic series. You're going to get into the strap, pull the wrap up, walk out, keep the strap high around the thigh, spin, collect the fabric around your back pocket and your side pocket, and I'm going to cheat by using a PVC to keep my upper body stable. This is of warm-up intensity. You're not going for heavy load. You're not going for high speed or high reps. Just trying to explore and warm up. Trying to improve or investigate if your body can dissociate the lower block from the upper block side to side. From a frontal plane view, from a view from the side, you should have good trunk structure or good trunk alignment. That means you are not starting in a position of extension. You are getting stacked and then shifting side to side. Okay? Again, of warm-up intensity. Next, with good starting trunk alignment, you're going to rotate your zipper 25, 30 degrees to the right or toward the resistance and bring it back to your starting position, trying to dissociate somewhat from the upper body. You are not trying to max out range of motion. Okay? Just let the strap win about 20 degrees toward the resistance, bring it back. Let the strap win 20 to 30 degrees towards the resistance, and then bring it back. Feeling as though you are somewhat dissociating your hips from your nips. That concludes this introduction on how to use the 3D strap. I want to thank you for listening, and I really, really hope it was educational. I want to especially thank the team at Train to Excel in Ridgefield, Connecticut for graciously allowing me to come and film content in their space. If you have specific questions regarding use of the 3D strap and you're not on Instagram, email me at whatsthatstrap@gmail.com. And if you're on Instagram, feel free to send me a DM. Thanks for listening.